So what's it going to take? I'm Michael Smerconish in Philadelphia. I can think of only one more shoe to drop for President Biden's precarious candidacy: the delegates. Directly or through their silence, we've already heard from every other foundation of the Democratic Party. The leadership: Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. The intelligentsia: the New York Times editorial page, the Washington Post editorial page, David Ignatius, Ezra Klein, Nate Silver. The members, 4 Democratic senators now, and more than 30 Democratic House members have called for him to step aside. It's hard to keep up with all the announcements. Yesterday, Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts published a heartfelt essay in the Boston Globe. Moulton said that he treasured the president as a mentor and friend, someone who, as vice president, would invite him to breakfast at the official residence and teach him about Congress. But on the 80th anniversary of D-Day, he saw the president in a small group at Normandy and, quote, "For the first time, he didn't recognize me." Soon thereafter came the debate at which we all watched. Moulton's reflection was reminiscent of George Clooney coming forward post-debate to share what he'd witnessed 2 weeks prior at a Hollywood fundraiser that he had hosted. Clooney shared that essay pre-publication with President Obama, who apparently didn't talk him out of its publication. Politico reported yesterday that the party has, quote, "run out of patience and believes a decisive moment is now at hand." The president faces a mountain of polling data which shows him trailing Donald Trump in all the battleground states and frozen campaign funds. An AP poll released this week shows that two-thirds of Democrats want him replaced, a finding that totally belies the president's assertion that this is only the sentiment of party elites. Against this backdrop, NBC reporting that Biden family members have discussed what an exit might look like. That's an extraordinary development given the repeated denials from the president, from his campaign, and the White House of any prospect of him standing down. As recently as Friday, the president released a statement that he will return to the campaign trail next week. With the Democratic convention less than 5 weeks away, it feels like it's building to a crescendo. Uncharted waters lie ahead, not the least of which is who and how would he be replaced. The New York Times reports that before the debate, Biden told confidants that he had a far better chance to beat Trump than Vice President Kamala Harris. Polling shows her approval rating about as abysmal as his. So will he endorse her? A Blue Labs draft memo obtained by Politico showed 4 Democrats running stronger against Trump in swing states than Biden or Harris: Senator Mark Kelly, Governors Wes Moore, Josh Shapiro, and Gretchen Whitmer. I've long believed the best way to pick the Democratic nominee is to see the party A-listers on the same stage. James Carville suggested town halls in every region in the country. George Clooney said likewise. A Georgetown law professor and a venture capitalist proposed a so-called blitz primary. They envision weekly forums moderated by cultural icons like Michelle Obama, Oprah, even Taylor Swift. Congressman James Clyburn has said that if Biden steps aside, a mini primary would be appropriate. And Politico now reports that in a meeting with fellow California Democrats just last week, former Speaker Nancy Pelosi stressed the need for an open process to choose the party's next nominee if President Biden steps aside, in an effort to avoid the appearance of a Kamala Harris coronation. Still, there are several reasons why Biden might not go with the competition idea and instead endorse Harris. First, he might appreciate her on the merits and believe that after 3.5 years as his vice president, she's best suited for the job. Second, it's Harris who could most easily control the $91 million the campaign has on hand, which, when including allied Democratic organizations, grows to $240 million. Third, Biden might still be smarting over the way he was treated as vice president by President Obama and not want to repeat the slight. He was discouraged by Obama from running in 2016, and in 2020, Obama didn't endorse Biden until Biden was the last man standing. And there's another more fraught reason Biden might be inclined to endorse Harris. He might feel beholden to endorse a candidate who could be the nation's first female president and a woman of color. The president has continued to draw political strength from the minority community, the same constituency that turned around his then moribund 2020 campaign in South Carolina's primary. So what might break the apparent impasse? Those delegates. It's quite remarkable to me that they are the only Democratic constituency we've not yet heard from. But they could have some leverage. They could conceivably determine the outcome. Convention Rule 13J says this: delegates elected to the National Convention pledged to a presidential candidate shall in all good conscience reflect the sentiments of those who elected them. No wonder then that the Biden campaign has been working the phones and trying to prevent what could be the final rebellion. The nation has wondered who would win the tug of war between the president and the Democratic leaders. The two sides are engaged in mutual assured destruction. This is a moment of ugliness unparalleled in modern American political history, and ultimately, it seems it can only end in the president's eventual capitulation because in a democratic system, governance depends on the consent of the governed. That consent is gone now among Democrats. When President Biden eventually accepts that reality, a new nominee will be left to cobble together the remains for what both sides regard as the existential mission of defeating President Trump.